and so I do have some prepared remarks just so that I make sure that I touch on all the points that I wanted to make sure that I touched on. But let me first say welcome and thank you for participating in zMOD. And several months ago, so actually it was last year. So it was almost actually, so last year I created a little body called a community council on land use. And the purpose of that little council, and so it included representatives who were interested in land use, who were involved in the community, and some who knew not very much about land use, but were interested in communication. And so we're interested in, sharing with me and our staff more information about how they get information, especially in today's modern age, and how we can hear from the community in this modern age. We have new tools for sharing information, new tools for people to share among each other what is going on in the county. So I just wanted to mention that because it does play into zMOD. zMOD is making changes to our zoning ordinance. And just a bit ago, the Board of Supervisors approved something called the Minor Modifications Amendment, which was a first example of how we intend to revise the language of the zoning ordinance. And the purpose of this is to be more accessible to you and more user-friendly. For those of you who are not experts in the zoning ordinance, it's a big document and it's dense in every sense of the word sometimes. Sorry, but it's grown over the years. And so over the years, we've amended it, we've changed it. Sometimes when you look at some of the guidance in the zoning ordinance, it seems to conflict. And so that's not very modern, and that is not very user-friendly to folks in the county who are abiding by our zoning ordinance. And so we are launching now the next phase. We actually amended our regulations for restaurants and signs, actually just yesterday with restaurants and with signs. And so we are tonight launching our next phase of zMOD. We do have a consultant who we're going to be working with and who is going to be assisting us, and that is Clarion Associates, to develop a new format for the zoning ordinance and to review categories of land uses. And what we envision at the end of the process, what we hope will come out at the end, is an ordinance that will be more user-friendly, more readable, and more up-to-date, and one that will provide a contemporary framework for the implementation of zoning rules for Fairfax County into the future. Most importantly, we want to make sure that this process is open and this process is informative to those of you who are participating and people in the community who will be learning about this process, through our various outreach methods. And so this will not be the only meeting. There will be a series of meetings. We'll be reaching out countywide to make sure that we're having, good engagement with members of the community. Let's see, there is currently a survey posted on the zMOD website for everyone to take, to be able to take. And I understand that some folks have already been on the zMOD website and have participated in the survey, and we hope that you will avail yourself of that opportunity. We want to make sure that everyone is informed and everyone has the opportunity to participate in this process. Again, the idea of zMOD is to modernize our zoning ordinance. Again, it's to make it more understandable to our constituents. So you are the audience that we are trying to reach. It's important that we are working with you and not adopting something that does not have the participation and the engagement of the people who are going to be using and affected by our zoning ordinance. And so with that, I will stop. I am going to be here for the duration. I'm interested in hearing the program, and I'm interested also in hearing your questions. So thank you very much, and look forward to the program. Thank you.
So thank you. So as you're going to hear in a few minutes, and Don's presentation will not be long because we really want to hear the feedback from you. Our zoning ordinance is 40 years old this year, 1978. Some people in this room I don't even think were born when the zoning ordinance was adopted. But what that does tell you is we have not done this frequently. And there are people like Don and his company who have done it frequently. They've done it in a lot of jurisdictions around the country. So what we wanted to do was to hire someone who had that expertise, who would help us understand how to take on this task. So with that, I want to introduce you to Don Elliott from Clarion Associates, who will tell us how we're going to embark upon our journey. Don.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Chairman, for the introductory comments. Again, my name is Don Elliott. I am a director with Clarion Associates. You see the agenda here. My goal is to try not to speak too fast, but to get through this presentation in a short amount of time. I hope 20 minutes, so we can have a full hour to listen to your questions about the process or things you'd like to see fixed in this effort. So basically, we're going to back on the presentation. I'm going to ask you then, do you have questions about the scope of what we've been hired to do and how we intend to do it in partnership with the county? Third, general things that you want to say about the zoning ordinance, and if you are quiet, which I doubt you will be at that point, to draw you out on some of the things that many communities find they want to address when they get into this process. So that's the agenda. There are two main things that we have been hired to do. One, as the chairman indicated, is restructure the ordinance. It's 1,200 pages long. I can look at that ordinance and realize how long ago it was drafted because the way we regulate land use now uses a different framework of looking at what needs to be done and how you do it. And so, it is restructuring, reformatting. When I say that, I sometimes think people think, oh, how hard can that be? That's just format. You got to do styles. You got to indent the text. It turns out to be quite hard because as this 40-year-old ordinance has evolved over time, things get added, and then they're inconsistent with each other. When you pull it apart and put it into a modern structure, you find those errors. You will tell me tonight, and lots of people have told me, the things that are already in conflict in there. We're going to find more, unfortunately. When you organize things rationally, you're going to find more things that need fixing. Second major job. Recategorize, rethink the way in which the county lists and regulates permitted and special exception and special permit uses of land. You have those criteria, and it depends on who gets to approve it. Those are rational categories, but there are a lot of things that have been amended over the years in uses that make kind of rifle shot amendments to this that don't make sense together. And furthermore, there are things that are coming into the county as ideas or development ideas, some of which are negative, some are positive, but they're not reflected in the code. So restructure it and rework the land uses. And we'll walk through a little bit about that. It is a partnership between our consulting team and the county staff who have been extremely cooperative in helping us to organize it. The chairman mentioned we've done this a lot, and Barbara mentioned we've done this a lot. I'm sorry that's a washed out map. We have worked in less than 200, but way more than 150 jurisdictions. We're proud to say that last night the Norfolk City Council, Norfolk, Virginia, adopted a code that our North Carolina office drafted with them unanimously, and that's how we like to have it happen. There's agreement at the end that this is a much better thing to do than what you have now. So we've done a lot. We're not a big firm. You can tell that some of us are in Denver and some are in Chapel Hill. I wonder why this is not working, but I'm not going to wait for it. There we go. Here is the team, the core team that's going to work on it. I'm the director of the project. Tim Richards is here. from the Chapel Hill office. He is a planner lawyer and also has drafted a lot of codes. Lisa Steiner is here. Raise your hand, from our Denver office. She's acting as videographer tonight. And I should mention that tomorrow we intend to post this PowerPoint, so you don't have to take verbatim notes. We're going to post it, and we're also going to post the video as soon as we can get it. If we decide it's video worthy, if it turns out that I'm not a very good presenter, then we won't post it. But we intend to post it so that you can, with your citizens in your groups, show it if you think it's a good introduction to what's going on. But definitely the PowerPoint will be posted. There's a fourth person, Tarek Wafai, who will honor also on our team. In the tasks that I just told you about, restructure, rethink the uses, we don't think we need our backup team, but we have a deep backup team. We have people who've done different kinds of code, Dover Cole, we have transportation consultants, economic feasibility consultants, web-based web code consultants. How do you put it on the web in a very searchable and interactive way? And we have Virginia land use law firm, because your land use law, every state's different, yours is really different, and we need to keep on top of that. And so that's our backup team. We do not expect that they will be needed during this part of the work, but I wanted you to see who they were. I'm not going to read these. You can read them while I'm talking. I have about 5 slides now on why are we doing this? Why would your elected officials decide that it is worth spending taxpayers' money to hire a firm from Denver and from Chapel Hill to do this work? Why is that? And the magic words are, A, things are scattered all over the ordinance. We have had over and over again in 2 days of meetings. You never know if you've got the full answer. If you live and breathe the code, you know that after looking here, you better look over there. But if you're not a zoning geek, you don't know that. And the amendments that have happened over the time, and this is typical, this is not a slam on Fairfax County, it happens in all old codes. You do an amendment, it was to serve a purpose, it made sense when you did it, and it doesn't make sense when you read it with all the other stuff that's been done so far. As a matter of fact, it creates a kind of a jigsaw puzzle of where do we find the answer. So that is part of it. It's scattered, it's very dated in not only the structure, but it misses a lot of new land uses that are coming in. We're not in control of what the market creates. Who thought there was a thing called doggy day spa several years ago? Who could think up personal trainers? Who could think up, the market can think up uses faster than you can name them or amend your code. And so how do you update it so that you have a more robust system that doesn't need to be amended all the time? So the uses are there. Now, I think you hired us because we've done a lot of this, and we can advise you as to how other urbanized, relatively affluent, highly educated communities that have the systems that you have and the types of development you have, how do they think about this? You may come out at a completely different place, but knowing how other people have worked through these thorny issues, or do they like this use? Do they hate this use? Do they like it with certain limits on it? Do they want to say no? We can advise you and work with staff and you to say, what do you think about it? But we do think you should address this use. It's going to come, and you either are going to know what your answer is or you're not going to know what your answer is. And interpreting it over and over again, I will say the staff now has to do lots of interpretation to figure out what this is like, or what it's not like, or whether it's actually been addressed or whether it hasn't been addressed. And that's not the way you want to run your county. So, and finally, it's very ungraphically interesting. Lots of people, I don't mean interesting, lots of people learn visually. A map, a chart, a graph, a table that shows what do we mean by this kind of landscaping? What do we mean by this kind of sign? When we say you're getting to a special exception, what steps will you go through to get there? There's a lot of visual things that can be done that convey information in a way that people say, I get it. I read the words over and over again, but I'm not a lawyer, and I didn't get it. But if that's what they mean in the drawing, then I get it. That's what new development is going to happen, or have to do when they lay out their development. So that's one of the reasons why. Let's see if I can get this to work again. It only likes me when I'm over here, I guess. Or not at all. I don't know, was it something I said? I want to show you on this slide one of the possibilities. Why to do this? This list of small font, I don't expect you to read it all, is your current 20 articles of land use regulation in the current ordinance. We have not made a recommendation, but this is a typical, just an example. Okay, everybody repeat after me. This is just an example. This is not Don's recommendation. But often, this type of information can be organized in only 6 or 7 chapters. One of them deals with what is the menu of zoning districts. One of them deals with what can you do in each of those districts. You can compare across them to make sure it's rational. One of them is building and development standards. How good does it have to be to get a yes in Fairfax County? One can be, how do I file an application? One can be, how are they going to review the application? But all of this stuff on the left often winds up, almost always winds up in a simpler, more intuitive breakdown so that as a citizen or a property owner, you kind of know which chapter the answer to that is in, and you can look in that chapter. So, this thing's not liking me. Structure, where do people wind up? I've already mentioned that usually you use fewer chapters. Usually you bring together as much as possible similar conditions, because once you put like things next to like things and you put all the exceptions you've adopted together, you realize it doesn't make sense, and then you can sort out what needs to be fixed. So the understandable terms and conditions, plain English, we're big believers in plain English. I'm a lawyer and I hate legalese. I don't think anybody's impressed by legalese anymore. I don't know where it came from, actually. Graphics and illustrations, and then the ability to navigate and put it in a structure so that it's more usable on tablets and computers and phones. I mean, that's where it's all going. You may not think today that you want to use your iPhone to figure out the zoning ordinance. You don't have to read it there, but it'd be nice to be able to use it to find the answers to discrete questions. And most new ordinances are organized, formatted, and delivered in a way that they are able to be put on the web and searched in a whole lot more technological ways than yours is now. Graphics, all the point of this slide is it can convey lots of information graphically that is not now conveyed there. It helps many people really understand what's going to be required, what's desired, what's not. So these are just examples of page layouts, density, etc., flow charts, steps in a process, design standards, etc. Lots more visual ways to convey information. I don't know why I walk over here since nothing works. So there you go. Uses. The next slide is why would we rethink land uses in the county? I've already explained. You're missing a lot that the market's going to bring to you, and it's hard. They have to interpret and interpolate a lot. Now on the left is the way you deal with it now. There are lists in each zone district of what's allowed by right. A more common approach at the end of the process is a table like the one on the right-hand side of the screen, where it says, what are we talking about? And there's a category, residential, and within that there's household living categories. You can see down at the bottom, there's a group living category. But to organize things and list things, define each one of those things so that there's a clear definition that doesn't overlap other definitions on the left-hand side. So on the left-hand side, there's only one page, guys. It's several pages long. This is the start of the table. Left-hand side is of reuse, organized in a rational way. Columns are the different types of districts. By the way, just an example. Okay, this is not our recommendation for Fairfax County. Don did not recommend mixed-use district. This is an example from another city. But organizing the districts across the top, and in every case telling you whether it's permitted or not, or whose permission you need to do it. Importantly, over at this right-hand side is a column that says, if there are restrictions on size, or hours of operation, or not on busy corners, or only on busy corners. If there are limits, yes. The answer is yes, and then the large print says yes, and the small print says, yeah, but you gotta read this stuff. Getting that corralled so that when you know you have read 3.3.2a, you know what the conditions are applicable to single-family attached dwellings. That's an enormous benefit because now you know that that's where you're going to find that information. And usually, and in your case, it is scattered throughout the code. So just corralling that and having, now, not my recommendation. It is an example of why many communities prefer an approach like this to an approach of list. Furthermore, it makes it easier for citizens to say, why is that allowed in my zone district when it's not allowed in similar zone districts like mine? Why is that not allowed in my district when other districts like mine allow that? It allows you to be more consistent over time in how you amend it. So where do people often wind up? They use fewer and broader land use categories to try to deal with the fact that the market creates new things all the time. And most ordinances deal with the impacts of those uses rather than trying to name every new doggy day spa that comes in and try to figure out what it is. Clear treatment of new uses, like electric vehicle charging stations are coming in. I could have a long list. We tried to put it on one slide here. Artisan manufacturing. in business zones, there is often a desire these days to say, in the old days we said, well, if you're making something, that's a making zone. It's an industrial zone, and if you're selling, it's a commercial zone. But I want to make craft ceramics, and I want to sell it from the same property. I want to make fabric or textiles, and I want to sell it from the same property. So that's an example of a new thing that is coming in. The market wants it. Does it mean it has to be in your neighborhood? No. But the ordinance should think through ahead of time whether you want to allow it, where you want to allow it, and under what circumstances you want to allow that use. Better than making it up or having the zoning administrator have to guess, well, is it industrial or commercial or something else? I don't know what it's like. So that's one of them. And then, as I mentioned on the previous slide, just organizing them in logical categories and showing the spread of who can do what where leads down the road to more internal consistency. When you want to add a new use, when it can't be covered and you need to add it, you know where to put it in the table, and then you can see, well, we treat things like this. We allow them here and we don't allow them there, and we require permission over here. This is not the same use, but the same arguments resonate here. So we ought to think about what we do with similar things as we make this amendment. It's much easier to do with this kind of a structure. So once again, just the last slide on why are we doing it. Vehicle-related uses. An increasing number of communities we work in say, we used to say it's living or selling and business or office and industrial. But these days, a lot of people want to address traffic impacts and think about the things that generate more traffic or more auto use than those that don't. And so this is a new way of categorizing it. Increasingly, over the past 10 years, people have said, corral all the auto-oriented uses so we see them in one category, and we can figure out whether we're treating gasoline stations, repair shops, related things like convenience stores, or even paint body shops, whatever, or transportation centers. Things that inherently mean cars and traffic are going to be coming and going from these things. Group them together so we can think about the impacts of those things in relation to each other. We used to not do that. Use-specific standards, I mentioned the right-hand column is where you list all the ifs, ands, or buts, the small print that taketh away the yes. Yes, but when I read the right-hand column, no, not on my property or not on his property. And then finally, scale. Older ordinances, I'll just give you the one example. Here's an example. Home Depot, hardware store. Makes a huge example whether we're talking about Home Depot or the Ace hardware store in my neighborhood. Often the answer is this use is fine. I'm just making up this example, a hardware store. But in the following zone districts, it's limited in its footprint. Its size is limited so you don't get a Home Depot. In places that are on arterials or big shopping centers, Home Depot is fine. So increasingly in dealing with uses, communities say, you know, part of the yes, is it okay here or is it not okay in these different zone districts? Well, how big is it going to be? So that right-hand column could say, in the following zone districts, it's limited to this size. In the following zone districts, it's not. So scale turns out to be something that we think about today when you draft land uses that we didn't think about in previous older ordinances. Not far from the end now. That is my 7 slides on why, and I'd be very happy to address your questions when we're almost there to the end. But basically, we're trying to engage as many people as possible. We have done this I've done it for 20, I don't even want to count, 28 years. Lots of time, 30 years maybe. We need to have you trust in this process, in the straightforwardness of this process, the fact that you have been, without every time we come up with a draft or a presentation, it is put out for your comments and we hear your comments back and we roll them into the next product that we do. That's one of the reasons our firm has been very successful, is that when you get to the end, and I'll be very honest with you, there will be people stand up and say, no, I didn't know anything about it. You guys, once again, you've done it to me. I didn't know about it. And the answer is, we got a long list of workshops, of websites, of all these engagement things. That's just debate unless you, in the end, believe that you were engaged in the process. So we're trying to do extensive stakeholder engagement. We are going to come back in a couple of months and offer a presentation on trends, once again. Fairfax County is unique in a whole bunch of ways that I don't need to explain. But The reason this is a challenging career for me is that every place is different, politically, economically, engagement-wise. You're different, and yet we think it helps for you to know where zoning practice is going in general. You don't have to agree, but usually it's going that way for some logical reasons. People look at the challenge, and they don't come to the same answer, but it's helpful to think about the factors that other people have considered as they weigh yes or no or maybe or heck no, and to bring that to the table. So the next thing we're going to do is talk about general trends in zoning and, to be honest, what it's doing in response to market forces, because you can ignore that. You don't have to say yes, but you shouldn't stick your head in the sand and not understand how it's going to push the county and every other urbanized complex area. And finally, I'll talk to you in a minute about the time frame, but each time we prepare a draft, we will put it out and we'll do another round of public engagement to try to explain that draft and highlight what has changed from the current code. When we produce these drafts, we will footnote, we will try our best, and we're good at it, to footnote each change. So if it looks pretty, Don, I like the drawings, it's cool, it's much prettier, but I don't know what you did to me. Or my neighbor, or the vacant lot down the street. We try to footnote it so that you can search the document and say, well, this changed, this changed, this changed. I'm sure going to write a letter to the chairman and say, stop doing that. I don't care where they do that. That's dumb. I hate it. To footnote the changes so that we take the time to walk you through what changed, why it is, answer your questions, and document that as we go along. So those are part of the keys. Right now, there are a couple slides on engagement. There is a website, and we have put the website down, the link right here, but it's going to be posted tomorrow. You don't have to write it down if you don't want to. There's also a Facebook page. So there's a project website that we'll use to post documents, presentations, drafts that you can review, list of upcoming meetings, a place for you to click and file a comment, a place for you to click to add your name to the email list. And by the way, you can do that today if you want to be on the email list at the back. It's a process by which you say you do, you acknowledge, you'll get an email, you'll have to accept the email, then you're on the list. But I hope you decide to be on the list. That list grows through the whole process. Email list for notices. We have these of the online survey. 600 people have taken it so far. This is a big county. You may think 600 divided by the population of the county is a very small fraction. I will tell you, 600 people doing zoning is a big number. I have had a lot that are smaller. I mean, zoning, talk to me about something interesting. About 600 people so far have responded and written comments in about what they think about the process and what they'd like to see the county fix in this process. And that'll stay open through the end of the month. We have said if people call in and say, I didn't know about it, it's now the 29th of the month, keep it open longer, we'll keep it open longer. We just want people to know it's out there. So there's a website, there's a Facebook, and we'll do interviews. We will interview as many people as we can and sit with groups. We've been doing it for 2 days. We'll do it again tomorrow, and we'll be back to do it again. Later on, we intend to produce some short clips, like 5-minute clips. Let us explain to you an area of change. I'm just making this up. Public entertainment, indoor entertainment, the difference between climbing walls and whatever else, shooting ranges, different things that all have different impacts, and yet that's one thing that keeps coming up. We don't do a good job. We haven't thought that through very carefully. So I'm using it only as an example. We may produce video clips, we may do one on that, but the idea is to give a clip so that one of us can explain what the challenge is, why we recommend doing it in that way, and then you could click on that at your homeowners meetings or your condo meetings or your business association meetings to say, well, they did try to explain it. I don't believe it. You may not believe it, but he tried to explain it. So we are going to do that later on. We mentioned the survey. Please, it's a SurveyMonkey site. It is, again, on the county's website, and it's here. You can take the survey. We want you to take the survey. Don't take it from the same machine over and over again because it finds that. Okay, so go to a different machine if you want to stack the ballot box. No, I didn't say that. Don't do it again, but urge your friends to do it. I'm completely serious. 600 responses after being out a couple of weeks is a good response. It tells us that what we knew before, you are very interested in it. So, and then there is an email. If you want to be put on, you can send your own email. All of this will be up tomorrow. Here's the schedule. First quarter of the year, this year, public outreach, interviews, visits, listen to stakeholder groups, listen to people. Second part, show you some alternative structures and get to a preferred table of contents and structure that people understand the pros and cons, and we want you to have it organize something like this. Third part, do the land use work. I've already explained why it's hard, but that's why it takes 6 months. We're going to have to pull apart all the area uses, find all the little jots and tittles of yes but no, and reconcile those things, and organize them, put them out, get them so that their staff thinks they're accurate, and then let you comment, come back and talk through it again. Before we do that, we'll be out here to talk about our approach so people understand the process we're going to go through before we do it. Then we'll go back to explain the draft. And the last 6 months is, take the existing 20 articles apart, put them into the new structure, and roll in the new use stuff. So we have done the heavy lifting, and we've gone through public review. Is it adopted? No. None of this stuff is adopted until at the end of 18 months from now. This is June of 2019, and I think it will be easy for you folks to understand. Sometimes we have a hard time. None of this is adopted until it's adopted. The way you amend the code is that you go through this process to try to be as transparent as possible. You mention all the changes you're making, so it's documented. We talked about this. We respond to every comment we can in terms of we made that change. We can't do them all. I've already seen it in the surveys. Go left, go right. Well, I can't go left and right at the same time. We can advise the county and then footnote whether we made a change or not in that area. But we do this to get to that point. All of this 18 months is to get to a draft replacement, which I guarantee you will be shorter and better illustrated, but hopefully you think represents good compromises between the tensions that are in the county, different values. At that point, it begins review by the Planning Commission and consideration by the Board of Supervisors. So none of this has been signed off by the Board of Supervisors or the Planning Commission until we get to the end of this process. We're not going to take the uses forward separately. It doesn't make sense. It makes sense when you put them together and you can explain what you were able to solve in terms of the problems and put it all together. We will tell this to every county. Do not try to do this in piecemeal format. It will not work. The right answer in a restructured code, we have it all the time. We do this part, this part, this part, we get to this part, and the right answer to that challenge is to go back and change what we did in the first part. It is of a piece. It has to fit together. None of it's adopted till it's adopted. There we go, and I think that is probably the end. The next step is continue to listen and get your comments, look at the surveys, work with staff to see if we've spotted the things that need to be done. By the way, that never stops. November, December, January, February of 2019, we'll still get comments about things people could have read February of this year. We'll still take them. We'll still take them. It gets harder to respond as you get down the road. If you tell us earlier, we get it right on the first draft. If not, it's open, always open for comment. And then we'll do the emerging trends presentation when we come back, probably in early May. Between that time and now, we're going to be asking a lot of questions of staff, trying to make sense of all the input we've gotten, trying to reconcile the survey. So I think with that, going back, I think what I'm going to do now is remind you what I'd like to do now. We have 3 things to do tonight, or maybe only 2. 1, see if you have questions about the scope of the project and how we're going to go about it. Just to see if you understand it, or you're comfortable, or you want to ask questions. And after that, go into, do you have things about the current zoning ordinance you'd like to tell us to fix, or don't you dare touch that? The things that you came to say about the problems or lack of problems in the current regulations. But I want to do that second. And then, if you're all quiet and everybody's bored, then I will throw out some interesting topics for you to talk about. But I bet we don't even get there. Does anybody have questions about the scope of the project, the time frame, the order in which we're going to do it? Right away. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I am interested in your answer. Zoning is law. Mm-hmm. How do you restructure an entire code that is law upon which plans and applications are based?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is law. That's exactly right. And as we showed you the dots on the map, every year more community or an additional set of communities comes in and says, we, the elected officials of Fairfax County, we wrote the law. We have the legislative power to rewrite the law or to write it in a more understandable fashion. So it is a legislative enactment. Some of you may, I gather we probably have a number of citizen activists a bit interested in here. or you're used to seeing zoning as a piece of this or a piece of that. Zoning tends to be separated into quasi-judicial things. We're doing a hearing as to whether this is the right change, a map change, or then a zoning change for, name it, some corner somewhere, some property somewhere. But counties always have the legislative ability to say, what we have as land use law now was a legislative adoption. The Board of Supervisors said, over time, incrementally, this is the rules that we want to use. And the same power that lets them adopt it incrementally through a change in restaurants or a change in minor modifications allows them to go in and say, you know what? It's time to replace that set of rules with this set of rules. But let me get to your next question. Right now, no one has asked us to change the zone districts. We have not asked to retire some districts or add new districts. So a year and a half from now, the list of zoning districts in Fairfax County will be the same list with a couple of exceptions. There are a couple of unused zone districts right now that have zero land in them. That staff says, well, we never used them. Doesn't hurt anybody to get rid of them. Nobody's ever used them. And so those will come out. But if it's already being used, the list will be the same. The uses that are allowed in each one will change. And when the Planning Commission, the citizens are more or less satisfied, and the Planning Commission thinks it's there and border, that list of uses available in this district will replace the current scattered lists of uses that are available in those districts. So, other questions? Yes, ma'am?
You had something in there that you're doing interviews already this week. How did you identify? It sounded like individuals, not government.
No, it's
who are these people? And how
okay.
they identify?
Yeah, sure. We work with staff as we always do to do that. Let me go back to this. Tomorrow morning we're working with an advisory group of citizens and folks that are residents of Fairfax County. We have met with land use lawyers. We have met with three groups of staff that implement it: code enforcement people, land development people. So it's a mix of staff and interest groups from outside the county. As part of zMOD, the county had brought together interest groups. Land use lawyers is one of them because they use the code. Engineers is another one because they use the code. Citizens is another one. And we're meeting with all of those. We will take our clue from the county staff, but in general, when we come back each step along the way, they usually ask us to try to get back in front of some version of those same people again. It's not individual. We haven't done any individual interviews, except for the fact we've met with a couple of members of the Planning Commission. We met with a couple of members of the Board of Adjustment. Everything else has been a group interview where we try to get people who actually use the ordinance or are familiar with its problems and try to get them in a room together. So I think I saw. Oh, go ahead. You have a follow-on? Sir. Yeah.
Related to the first question, is the intent while we're listing ordinance structure and format, and through the different drivers, you've noted that there's going to be conflicts that obviously are identified there. Is the real intent to resolve those conflicts in the adoption, or is it just going to be the structure and the format, and then the Planning Commission will resolve the conflicts at some other time after the 18-month period?
Did everybody hear that question? I'll repeat them if you're not, but I'm seeing some nodding back there. The issue is, it's a great question. It's a great question. When and I hinted at it at the start, when you pull it apart and put it back, how hard can it be? Well, it's really hard. It's really hard to figure out how to do it. And when you figure it out the right way, you'll find it's much more trouble than you thought it was. And so gaps, inconsistencies, three answers to the same question. The answer to your question is, it will probably be a mix of both. It will be clear, or at least clear to the people who know the code best, that is an oversight. We always thought that it said no in that situation, but upon reflection, never did say no. Staff has told us, the code enforcement and the other people, there are many times when we internally, staff have interpolated and figured it out, and we know that the combination of answers is no in that situation, but we can't point to where it says that. You have to look at a variety of different things to come to that conclusion. So it will probably be a combination of the two. Some things it's like, that's just telling people what they already think is the law there. Others, I have a feeling we will raise. Some we will footnote in the draft and say we think we should go left instead of right, and here's why. And if you disagree, we will be considerate. We'll consider it. Some I predict will come up, and the conclusion of staff and the groups will be, You know what? That sounds like a little gap, a little inconsistent. It's a huge one. It will affect a lot of property rights. It's going to affect a lot of neighborhoods. We weren't aware of that, but that's going to deserve a policy. We need some policy guidance from the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. So we're going to put that in a stack of things, and either staff, they're busy, but either they try to get some guidance before we bring it forward, or they say, let's not do that. No matter what we do, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. We can't resolve that until we have a thoughtful conversation about it. So that's not supposed to be a mealy-mouthed answer, but the answer is some of them are easy to solve, and some you don't want to tackle. You don't have the knowledge to solve them. So
right, that's what I figured. It wouldn't be fully fleshed out content.
That's right.
At a particular time. There would be some.
But for example, if this issue of redoing the uses will have implications. If you rename the uses, we have not been hired to redo the districts or the parking standards, for example. A lot of people would like, everybody hates parking in America. It's an American right to not like parking standards. We have not been hired to do that. But on the day the Board of Supervisors adopt the new ordinance, that parking standards have got to align with the new uses. You've got to know you've got to turn the key and the engine runs. You've got to know how to answer questions. So I say uses, we haven't been tasked with anything else, but there are related issues that will need to be resolved so that this new approach to permitted uses will work the day after you adopt it and you go down the road. You had your hand up, ma'am.
Yes, with every rezoning grid, there is a financial impact, both on the negative.
Right.
What steps, homes that may lose value, there will be some neighbors that are going to increase in value. Is the city, or the county have points that they're going to implement to reinvigorate or?
Okay, the question, she spoke kind of softly, so I'm going to repeat that question. What about the financial impact of these changes? When you even do something that sounds totally rational and you're convinced that it's the right thing for Fairfax County, it will have impacts. It will benefit some people. It may benefit some people's property values, and it may decrease. And whether it does or not, there'll be people who think it does. There'll be people who are convinced that this will not be good for their property values. So that was her question. And how does the county intend to address those? They're kind of two answers. One is that I want to be very clear at this beginning meeting. We have not been told to replan the county. The county has adopted plans, and until they're amended, those are the plans. We have not been told to downzone neighborhoods. We have not been told to upzone neighborhoods. Until this part of the presentation, I don't think I've ever used the word density. We have not been added to increase height or density. We have not been asked to decrease height or density on these things. That is not part of this let's get to a better structure discussion on the process. Now, having said all of that, you're exactly right. The county does not, we have a real estate economist on the team we can call up to talk about the probable effects of that if we need to. The real answer is, if we do our job and it's more rational, we know that nobody wants to see their residential property values decline. Nobody wants that. Nobody's trying to tell us to do particular things. The short answer to your question is, if we put that out there and explain why we think it's the right thing to do in light of market pressures or demographic pressures or what's happening in the county, and we recommend it, and you don't buy it because you think it hurts your property value, there'll be a discussion and somebody will say modify it or take it out. So we have had people, let me give you one more sentence. We have had clients say, before we adopt this, we're going to do an economic analysis of its fiscal impact and its financial impact on the county. I got to tell you, maybe Stephen Hawking can do that. I can't do that. And we don't know anybody who can do that because it depends entirely on which property you're talking about and the context of it. So to be honest, it started with your first question. It's a legislative enactment. If people complain that this will hurt them, and we explain why we don't think it will, and the county commission, either staff says, well, this one's on fire, we gotta hold off, we gotta stick with what we got. Don, you're a nice guy, might make sense, we'll tackle it next year. We'll either pull it out, or the planning commission will hear it, or board of supervisors will hear it. But the long-winded answer is, we count on a transparent process and our ability to explain things, to identify the things that people don't want to have happen, and I predict that those are going to come out in the course of the review and adoption process. So, I think I saw it. Yes, sir.
With respect to residential property, if you're not going to do any of the things that you said you're not going to do, what could you do which would raise or lower the value of
Well, here, the question was, if we're not doing parking and we're not doing density and we're not trying to replan or change the nature of a neighborhood or an area that the county has a plan for, what could possibly happen here that would do that? Well, as you rethink the categories of land uses, I'll give you a couple of examples that have come up in our discussion so far, and then take your questions. There are home occupations is a garbled part of what's going on in the county right now, which few people, look, guys, I get it. One of the major themes here that we have come up, people are very concerned about protecting stable residential neighborhoods. And many people who've answered the survey are worried that the zoning lets into the neighborhoods too many things that don't belong there. We're well aware of it. And at the same time, the market is pushing more people to do home occupations, some of which have impacts on their neighbors, some don't. The truth is, you have no idea whether your neighbor's designing websites on his computer. There's no way you would know. He sits at home and he does the websites and he's got a business. But nobody ever shows up. Nobody ever delivers anything. Nobody ever stores anything. He doesn't have used cars for sale in the yard. So you don't know. So home occupations, and then a different category, which is many newer codes adopt new standards of uses that say there is such a thing in this place, not a residential neighborhood, as live work. You can live in this and you can have a studio. You can be making what you make, salsa. I'm making that up. Whatever it is. It's not put in residential neighborhoods, but it's put in some of the neighborhoods that, in fact, have other businesses in them. And they say, instead of saying you can live here or work here, we have a new use called live work, and here are the regulations on live work. You can say no to that, but our job will be to say many people think that's coming. And we've had those kind of comments in the survey too. Get it up to date. My friends do X, Y, and Z, but I don't know how they could possibly do it in Fairfax County. So address those. And the answer to your question is, we can give you advice as to what we think the county ought to consider doing or what we recommend, but some people will take that and say, I think that hurts my property values. I think that hurts. Any change you make to home occupations is going to result in more people working out of their homes. I don't like that. I think you're hurting my property value. Other people, frankly, will weigh in and say it actually helps me because, honestly, if I could work out of my house and do something that doesn't have impacts on my neighborhoods, that means I don't have to rent an office. That means I actually, my house now has more value to me and other people like me because we're clearer on their home occupations and they're actually willing to live and work out of here because it has no impacts. And so that's the answer to your question is there will be unintended impacts from a rational land use system. We are not been told to make them happen. But I've done this for a long time, and your question was great. There's no way to do it and not fill in the gaps, or at least talk about the gaps. And there's no way to do it without having somebody come in and say, you're hurting me. Or somebody come in here and say, you're giving him a windfall. And we just work that through the process. The only thing I can do is to try to be honest about those and clear about the changes and be willing to discuss why we think they're not negative, and then the review process will do that. So, I see two more hands. I'll go to the back first. Yes, sir.
In your experience throughout the country, what impact has homeowners association had generically in the process? Do you get some involvement, no involvement, people burning down the...
Throwing things at me and tar and feathering me and things like that? The question was, what is the impact that homeowners associations have? And I'll answer it for both homeowners and condo associations. Usually a huge impact because they show up. It is hard to get all the citizens that are affected involved. We do our best. I've gone out of my way to kind of say all the things we'll use, and county staff knows from experience. We'll have to do more. The second part of your answer is it'll grow as time goes on. No matter what we do tonight, and we will get people waking up 6 months from now. We'll get people waking up a year from now. We'll get people waking up 17 months from now in an 18-month process. It's going to happen. There is nothing I can do to prevent that. There is nothing. All I can do is demonstrate all the ways we've tried to make it open. But I'll tell you this, and my candid answer is, residential neighborhoods represent voters. And usually they have a very large impact on whether the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors think this is actually helpful or not helpful to their neighborhoods. It will grow over time, and no matter what we do, there'll be more at the end. That's all I can say is it ramps up over time because I think I know why this happens. I think early on, no matter what a splash we make, people are not aware of it, and some think it won't happen. Some think they'll never get there. I know how this county works. We'll either I'll kill it, or he'll kill it, or the business community will kill it. I'll never get to the finish line. And as you get closer to the finish line, more people got to say, I think I better read this thing. I think I better go to the meeting finally. So that happens. But we should keep the lines of communication open to make sure. I'll tell you this. If there's significant residential opposition to where we wind up, this ain't going to get adopted. So that's who votes for the elected officials. I'm going to you first and then you later. So go ahead, you first. So.
You had mentioned the land use categories and some of the updates with the land use categories. So how's the process? How would that align with some of the policies that are in the comprehensive plan? Is there sort of checks and balances as those categories get revisited to make sure that they are aligned with the comprehensive plan?
That's a very good question. The question was, all right, we have explained how we'll try to update and rationalize the system of land use controls. How does that align with the policy guidance or the goals of plans that have been adopted for different areas? So I'm going to give you a combined answer. Sometimes we get hired to do the following. Please align our code with our planning goals. That has, and we do it regularly. We try to do it. That's good planning. You do your plans and then you align your zoning with it. That has not been part of our scope. In the course of doing the use work, I think what is likely is that as we recommend preferred approaches to new uses or garbled uses that are handled, we think, not very well in the current ordinance, staff will look at that and they will form an opinion as to whether it's sensible or not, keeping in mind what the goals of different areas of the county are. So that's a half and half answer. I think as planners, staff will not be able to turn off what they know about the county's goals for those areas, but we're not been asked to change it to align with those adopted plans, and we could, but that is not part of our contract. I saw two more hands. Yours was next. Yeah.
How are you going to communicate these changes to the people? How do you capture what we now have? How do we see what the differences are? How quickly will we be informed? And that's the process that will, get you agreement in the long run.
Right.
So how does that happen with this new modern approach?
How are we going to communicate all the changes? And there are two or three answers to that. First answer I mentioned earlier, we try to be look, my success in this business turns on my ability to get counties and cities to adopt our products. If nobody, and by the way, I have some competitors who have a very poor record on that. So I consider it a victory when we get it good enough that you adopt it. So to do that, we have to footnote all the changes and not be accused of it at the end of the process. So footnotes are one, executive summaries are another, to highlight in a 2 or 3 or 4 page thing about this thing. What are the significant changes that are happening? So you can just take that instead of reading all the footnotes if you want. Third way is to get through these kinds of meetings where I have to get to a point in these meetings where you trust that when I put a presentation up about the uses, we are disclosing to you the ones that we think make the most difference and being willing to answer questions about all of them. Now, having said that, footnotes, executive summaries, presentations in rounds of public meetings. What we plan to do is when we have a proposed structure for the restructuring, to be honest, I think there's not going to be a lot of attention on that. Very few people have told me, oh, I love the structure. I've had one somewhere, oh, I think it's wonderful, I just love it. But there's always one in every crowd. But that's not going to get a lot of attention. Everybody wants it better organized, but we will disclose the changes and the options to do that. The real meat of this is in the uses and then putting it all together and bringing it to you. In each of those cases, we're going to do a staff draft so that the staff can tell us where we just misunderstood something. That's you called it X, you thought you knew what X meant, we've done the definition, but in fact, that's not what that has ever meant in Fairfax County. We got to fix that before it goes out to the public, or they'll be baffled by this. And so we go staff draft, and then we correct it, and we put it out in public. We try to do that about a month before we come out to talk with you, so that you have at least one meeting, and if you wanted to pay more attention in your condo or your homeowners, you could have a special meeting during that time before we come out to explain it in a round of public meetings. So we try to give you, I will be very honest, we aim for a month, sometimes it's 3 weeks, but we do it with an executive summary, and then try to give people time so that we come out and do it. Now, then we have this discussion after you've had a time to review it. I want to be very clear about one thing, and I think it's not the way Fairfax County usually does business, but I could be wrong. When we produce the revisions to the use regulations, and the staff has said that's good enough to go public, we think it's accurate and reflects what we think ought to happen, and we take it out, we give you a month, we review it, we answer all your questions, and you say at the meeting, we got a lot of things we don't like about this, or we need more answers. Or you write in comments. You don't say anything at the meeting, but the next day you write a letter, you write an email, you post a comment, say, I didn't like the way you did this, or you didn't talk about X. You didn't think it was important, but it's important to me. I don't want you to do X. When you do that, we collect that. We try to document it in terms of posting a list of those things, not verbatim. We're not going to do that. This is not federal rulemaking. But we try to capture it in a way that we don't later get accused of being dishonest about it. But we won't produce a second and a third and a fourth draft of that product. We will never get there. I'll tell you, I'm just giving you an example. If I give you preferred approach to uses and I do the best job in the world explaining it, and I get comments back and we say, fine, we'll do another draft of that. Well, when that second draft goes out, we'll have the same people commenting. Some of the changes, to be honest, don't make sense. You run it through staff and you say, we tried that and it died. It's never going to get approved. Or Clarion says, we know 5 places that did it that way and it don't work. And so we don't make the change. Now there's another person weighing in again. I still want you to do that. Plus new people who woke up in the meantime who have more comments. You never get to the finish line. And the bottom line is, and you lose, when you do that draft after draft after draft, what our experience is, you lose the reasonable people who are here to try to solve problems. You eventually, reasonable people with families say, you know, I'm tired of that meeting. The first one was interesting. I'm not doing that again. Well, who shows up when the reasonable people go home? It's the people who are paid to come to meetings or really are that. Now you've got a real biased crowd. So to keep the reasonable middle ground engaged, when we get the uses out there, we will try to be as honest as possible about the changes that are requested, and we will roll those, when we fold them into the restructured ordinance, we will try to make them and footnote the changes so that we know what happened to them. Now, when we get to the bottom of that 4th round, now we've got a restructured ordinance. Many of the footnotes will say, this came from section XYZ. We made it English, but we didn't change it. If you don't like it, you don't like your current code, because that's what your current code says. That happens all the time. I hate this. Why did you do this? It's in your current code. You just didn't know it was there. So the footnotes tell you what changed, what didn't change. You do that. When we get to that point, now we have a complete draft with the uses regulations, and we've responded as much as possible to the criticisms that were made and the changes that were requested. To be honest, at that point, it's really up to staff. If staff says, wow, we got 350 more comments, it sometimes happens that the county says, look, let's do another draft of this before it goes to planning committee. That could happen. But the time to do it is when you have the whole picture in front of you, because at that point, the question is really, is this ready to be considered in a public hearing process or not? I'm not encouraging that. It's not in our contract. It happens sometimes. Now you're at the end of the drafting process. You're pretty close to, we think this is ready to be debated in public. But at that point, if you want another draft of the whole thing, that's a discussion. But we're not caught at some interim step going around and around, and you don't even have a draft of what it's going to wind up by at the end. So that's a long answer to your question. But in general, we try to do a lot of communication, a lot of advance notice. That does not mean we're going to produce draft after draft. And I'll answer the next question. No, there will not be a red line. When you pull a code apart and you rewrite everything, the entire thing would be read. It can't be done. I'm not a jerk. I'm not trying to hide anything. The nature of this job is we moved everything. So it's all read. We put everything in plain language. So anything that was not read is now read. So it can't be done. I'm not being difficult. It just can't be done. So I saw 2 hands here, and I think one was back here. I'll take you and then, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a very informative presentation tonight. I'm not a land use attorney. I'm just a civic association leader. And so my question is maybe borrowing from some of your experience in other communities. The zoning laws here in Fairfax County, you should point out, are 1,200 pages.
Yeah.
I've never read them. I will never read them. but some of the land use attorneys who are here tonight probably know them like the back of their hand.
Yep.
So when you go to change and move things around, there are certain tools that communities can use to help shape the commercial investment in those communities. I don't know where those provisions, I know what those provisions are in general, but I have no clue where they are in those 1,200 pages. So how am I ever going to get to the position to be able to say when you've moved that and simplified it and maybe even changed it somewhere else, that at the end of the day, when the Board of Supervisors already approved it, and we say, well, gee, that's not the way any of these commercial things are done before, I said, whoa, you
approved it. Yeah, you approved it.
Because we had no clue that was being changed, because we don't know what that provision looks like.
So
how have you dealt with residents who are not land use professionals in other communities so those types of problems don't exist?
Oh, great question. I guess the short answer I'll give is this. That's why we try to meet with as many groups as we can, and that includes developers and business owners and business investors who can help us, guide us along the way, and citizens. And we try to give, when we present this stuff, the same information to the citizens that we're giving to the developer. We don't tailor it so that we're not talking business with the citizens and we're not talking residential neighborhood protection with the developers. We have to protect those too. In the end, you've asked a very sophisticated question. How do I know, you seem like a guy who means well, Don. How do I know it's going to work out the way you say? And the short answer is talk to as many interests as possible along the way. And then, when we get near the end, if you have doubts about the impact of whatever regulation on a particular industry or a type of development or the ability to reuse vacant office buildings or the ability to cram something you don't like into a corner of a residential neighborhood, at that point, it becomes a highly interactive, specific question and answers with staff, basically. We try to communicate it, but at the end, we just finished a 3-year project to do a complete rewrite of the worst, you're not the worst, the worst zoning ordinance I've ever seen in Albuquerque. And 2 or 3 times in that process, they had to set up office hours where basically anybody could come in and ask any question about anything, and staff would do their best to answer that question or say, we don't know the answer to that question, we're going to have to research and get it back to you. So that's the short answer. There isn't a blanket answer. That will turn on us trying to be candid and you deciding and talking to the people who will be most affected by that change and see what they think about it. So that's the best answer I can give you. I see hand. Go ahead, sir. Yeah, and then I'll come back to you.
I lived in New York City during the 70s before I moved to Fairfax County in 1977. And I was trained somewhat in planning and zoning by John Zaccardi, who was then the chairman of the New York City Planning Commission. So I had a great mentor to do that. I came to Fairfax County and then I didn't understand anything. I went to American University. Dr. Maury Selden, who led the real estate program, I remember in 1978, he was trying to show us the difference between the different jurisdictions. Fairfax had just adopted its new zoning ordinance. It was Chinese to me. I mean, it may as well have been written in Chinese. So here I am 40 years later, and Chairman Bull knows full well. It was only by chance going to your office about 10 days ago and reading your newsletter that I found out about this meeting tonight. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just telling you that's what happened. And so a couple of main themes in the last 40 years. Number one, we've gone from mainly single-purpose zoning categories. We now have many more mixed-use categories. And so in approaching your outputs, I don't know how you intend to do it, but it would seem to me you've raised some very important issues about uses within homes. So it would seem to me the issues related to the primarily residential zones should be one set of throughput and output. And then for the office and the industrial, but then the mixed-use district, I'm in Reston, and I promise you we have plenty of challenges.
I've heard.
And the problem in part is that the county has made numerous changes even within the last 2-3 years. We adopted an updated comprehensive plan in Reston. To give you one example, I was at a public meeting in Reston at the end of October when I read this article the day before about the repurposing of office buildings. and I happened to read an article in the McLean local newspaper. It wasn't in the Reston newspaper.
Yeah.
By the time I read it, the Planning Commission had already passed it, and it was a done deal, and it was passed, I think, on about December the 5th by the board. When I went to look, I think it was the Office of Community Revitalization who handled the process, I looked at who was on the task force, and it was a whole bunch of developer and land use lawyers. There were no citizens groups represented. And so what I would say is that kind of action diminishes trust in the government.
Yeah.
And so this has nothing to do with what you're doing.
No, you're making a valid point. Go
And
ahead.
so what I'm saying is, I hope the county learns that that's not how, and so I still don't know the implications of the repurposing of the office buildings, allowing this, that, and the other. Somebody has said to me that it will actually diminish the traffic impacts, but that's the other main point I want to make is that I've been involved in transportation and land use for 35, 40 years. I was in real estate, I retired 10 years ago. So transportation operates sometimes on a totally separate track than land use decisions. And so we have to...
It usually operates on a separate track. I mean, go ahead.
So that, unfortunately, in coming to a satisfactory conclusion, we were just in a meeting in Reston 2 nights ago, and I left at 10:15. I'm sorry, I was tired. But what I'm saying is, it became apparent that what the developer wanted by, let's say it was something like 1.6 million square feet in multiple phases, and at about 10:15 I came up with the idea, well, since it's a multi-phase project, part of it should have to wait on until the Sunset Hills Road is widened. Because I've been asking the head of transportation for a year, what is the schedule for doing this? So all I'm saying is, in the process you follow, I don't know where the transportation inputs come and how.
I think everybody, just a second, I want to give a short answer because there are about 4 or 5 questions in there. Yes, we're going to have to deal with the fact that there are more varieties of mixed use than there used to be, and they belong some places and they don't belong other places. Second, you have had a bad experience in the county's outreach related to Reston, and I've heard you're not the first one to mention it. All we can do is say we will do our best to avoid that situation and give as much advance notice as possible. That's all I can do. The transportation thing is everybody struggles with this. I happen to sit on the Denver Planning Board. We're growing like gangbusters, so we have some of the same problems. And you would think with putting a person on the moon and having drones deliver things, we could get right how you align land use with transportation impacts. And I'm here to tell you that I don't know a jurisdiction in America that gets it right. Everybody struggles with it because it really is rocket science. All the variables are changing all the time. And so my point is, I have a feeling the answer to your question is, as we consider how to modernize the land uses, staff is going to have to work with staff is probably going to put it through a filter. Yeah, Don, those things actually usually have similar land uses, but in Fairfax County, the way they're playing out, or in certain locations, those are going to produce unacceptable traffic impacts. We need to think through whether the conditions under which those things are allowed here. I'm not a transportation planner, but they go hand in glove. And just as I think staff will not be able to turn off that part of their mind that says, what is the adopted plan for that? I don't think they're going to be able to turn off their mind on the transportation.
So since you're from Denver, my son works in Boulder.
Okay.
And I was out there this summer, read the article how the city of Denver had reduced the parking ratios in some of the older areas. I personally remember 2 years ago trying to find a parking place in Denver on a Sunday night. Okay, so there is that relationship. And
we know. I sit in angry meetings about it. I know about it. I'm going to go to some more hands here, but we're recording the meeting, and part of the reason is to do outreach and let people know what the questions were. Part of it is so we don't miss anything. So I'm going to move on to another question. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
You had mentioned earlier the real estate economist looking at residential and property values. I was just curious, to what extent will you look at the economic opportunity for disenfranchised populations or groups, or what experience do you have in doing that with the categories?
Okay, good opportunity, good question. I want to be clear, though. We have a real estate economist on the job, and when the answer was, are you going to look at fiscal impacts? The answer is, we have a team that can do that. We don't know whether we're going to be asked to do that or not. My basic answer was, nobody wants to hurt residential neighborhoods, and so we trust to disclosure and public discussion to identify things, because it really doesn't matter whether I have an expert that says it won't diminish your property values. If you think it does, you're going to call your supervisor and say, I don't like it. And so the bottom line is, we can have that resource. But in terms of disenfranchised or people that face barriers to employment or barriers to investment, well, let me talk in general terms about it. Most of the time when people revisit land uses, they're very interested in removing all kinds of barriers to business formation or employment in the mixed, not residential neighborhoods, in the mixed use and commercial and industrial barriers. No government I know tries to create deliberate barriers to investment. They do have quality standards, and sometimes those can be barriers. So the bottom line is, I have yet to work with a client that says, please try to make it harder for someone to form a small business or to get moving in a particular location. So, that's part of the answer. There's another part of the answer that I will say today, even though at the danger of my contract, I haven't discussed this with my client. You have an issue here with vacant buildings, and many places have an issue with vacant buildings and vacant land, and they would like to use those to create new kinds of economic opportunity. We look through that lens as we do the use restriction. The real issue is, what impacts does it have on those things around them? And often, zoning has a lot of unintended impacts that tend to keep things out, for which, when you really unravel it and you hold it up next to other opportunities, there's no reason we're keeping that out. There's no reason we are making it hard to create that kind of employment or business. I'm very serious. You would think it wouldn't happen. It happens all the time. And I actually think planners are to blame for this. Planners are partly to blame. Planners created the rules. Over time, they have unintended impacts, and there's no process to get rid of those unintended impacts, to go back and say, is this a barrier to the type of small-scale business formation or employment formation that we actually say we want to have? This is an opportunity to do that, as much as it relates to the uses. I've said we're not doing parking, we're not doing other things, we're not doing landscaping. But I'll tell you what's going to happen in the next year and a half is that as we do what we're paid to do, I think the county is going to get a much better picture about what other things in the zoning ordinance are creating barriers to business formation and investment. And it keeps changing the way people make a living. But part of what's going on here is, at the end of this, let me just mention, at the end of this process, the county anticipates that there will be specific additional things they need to do because they've risen to the top as the next most important thing to fix. And our contract says, Clarion, we're going to work with you to do that. We don't know what they are now. But even in this 2 or 3 days we've had so far, we're getting a better picture of what are the things that are most in need of fixing. And my guess is kind of eliminating unintended barriers to economic investment, particularly in distressed areas or disenfranchised or vacant areas. It usually rises to some level of priority in thinking about the future. So, yes, sir. I'm sorry, this woman was first. Let me go for it, and then I'll come to you. Just go ahead. I'll keep my answers shorter so we can get more, okay?
I just have a question about the usage. It seems to be that is something that you're actually bringing to the table, and I'm wondering if it's going to all appear in one place so we can look at it all at once, or is it going to be scattered in just the reorganization?
Yeah. The reworking of the uses will be in one place where we explain all of it at once. How it's presented, what is allowed where, whether it needs permission now but it didn't before, whether it doesn't need permission now but it did before, what are the conditions, what's the definition, and all of that will be at once. It has to be at once. It's not presentable until we get it all together. So, yes, sir. Yes.
So you may have answered this question already. This is a little bit different question. Of the communities within which you've worked, which one would you say was most similar to the exercise you're doing for Fairfax County in terms of the size of the county, the population, diversity, economics, and so forth. If we could perhaps go back and look at the work that you've done with respect to what the zoning code was like before, and then what it is now. So you've already mentioned Albuquerque, but perhaps there's one that's more similar.
I will mention some, but let me do this. I'm happy to have you look at our prior work. We're proud of our work. We have. By the way, the vast majority, way over 95% of things get adopted. That's because they work through the process. They work through the process and then they're amended. When they're good enough, they get adopted. But it's not a claim of pride for me, except that we run the process so that they get to the finish line in the end. Philadelphia, we worked with. Albuquerque was a big issue. Indianapolis was a big issue. We've done work for Miami-Dade County in the past. But the further back, I'm trying to choose big, complicated places. We are now working in Prince George's County, Maryland. That is not comparable to Fairfax County. I know it. I didn't say it was. except that it is very big and very complicated. It has major issues with distressed and disenfranchised communities and a completely different political culture. But it is big, complex, and when we walked in the door, it has a really layered and impenetrable set of standards that makes it very hard, not just for citizens, but for builders to figure out what they can do. So, in a sense, I did not say you're like Prince George's County. I will deny it. But it's in the D.C. area. It's subject to the D.C. economy. It compares itself to, they ask themselves, why do people build things in other places that they can't get approved here? So it's part of the same economy. I don't want to answer the question, what's most like it? Please look at any of those big, complex places. I'm not just saying this. Fairfax County isn't like any place we've worked. And I would say that, I actually would say that for Indianapolis too. It's not like, it's a consolidated city county, it has its own problems, it has 38 members on the political board. How can you compare that with anything? The thing that makes this career doing for me is that each one is different and you have to figure out what works there. So, but please look at all this. Matter of fact, you can get on our website and there's a lot of, you can look at any of the codes we've done. And I mention those because they're big, complicated, and it shouldn't be too hard to find where we started, how bad it was when we first began the process. Yes, sir.
One of the ways to simplify, and you are going to simplify hopefully the code and all that stuff, is through standardization. I too live in Reston, which is a unique environment, and it is a place that right now most of the residents like the way it is, and we don't want to be standardized into the rest of the county or the rest of the world. And we're going to fight tooth and nail to avoid that. How can you guarantee to people like me that your standardization of the rest of the code is going to still allow us to live in our unique environment?
Okay, good question. And let me start out with a simple answer. This project is not about Reston. This was not about, we understand it's been very controversial lately. We understand there's a lot of hard feelings and a lot of things that people wish had been done differently. I'm not ignoring Reston, but it's not about Reston. I don't like the word, I can't guarantee anything except an open process. The question you have is standardization. I would resist. I don't think that's what we're doing. We're trying to use a common terminology so that things that are in fact the same are called by the same name, and people can get used to what that is. I don't think that the process, we will look at the uses in Reston. We haven't been asked to increase them, haven't done anything with them. So we haven't been asked to increase them or broaden them, haven't been asked to decrease them. My view is Reston is a truly unique place in Fairfax County. That's why it has its own zone district. That's why you have your own use controls. I'm not persuaded that's a reason why you have to call the same thing by a different name. I don't think that's helpful in most governance structures. And so the short answer is, as we talk about revising uses, first of all, nobody's asked us to get rid of the PRC district. It's there. There's no attempt to standardize it into some other mixed use or residential zone district. That's that. It is what it is. Will we look at the names of uses and the restrictions of uses? Yes, we will in Reston. Will we try to make them the same as they are outside of Reston? Nobody's told me to do that so far. It has told me to come up with a rational structure. If there are unique things about Reston's use controls, no one's told me they want to change that yet. I will probably try to use the same, if the same thing situation, I'm not standardizing. If the same situation arises outside Reston and you want to call it by X, then we'll probably use the term X when it happens in Reston too, because we do need to have a standardized vocabulary, and if possible, definitions. That doesn't mean the controls are the same in different parts of the county, and no one's told me they want to do that for Reston. Matter of fact, they've warned me that I do so in Reston at my peril. So,
well, what I'm trying to say too is that Reston has a master plan that by default is incorporated into the Fairfax County comprehensive plan, which is not a typical way of doing things. And when you go ahead and you start tweaking the comprehensive plan, then you may be also affecting the master plan in Reston.
We understand, but we are not replanning. We are not going to be doing plan amendments. We don't anticipate doing map amendments. That has, I don't think it's been said overtly down here. We have been told, assume, Don, today, going in, your job is not to rethink the zone districts, and that includes the PRC district. Your job, when you start, you're going to have these zone districts. When you end, you're going to have the same -3 that had 0 land in them, so they're gone. That's what we're working with. Rethink the uses, but that doesn't, but you know, the idea is not to standardize Reston with the uses elsewhere, because the secrets to uses, the definitions can be common. It is the limitations or the conditions or the special treatment they get in different parts of the county. You got your own zone district. It's not hard to create a separate system that does what Reston's plan says it wants to do. I understand the concern. I don't think you need to be as concerned as you are. That's not what this is about, and no one has told me they want to change the nature of Reston or try to do something about the uses that would change the approved plan. Now, you've had your hand up for a very long time. I apologize.
First of all, I'd like you to go over public meetings.
Okay.
In your process, how do you see a public meeting? This is the first meeting. We're halfway filled up the room. All right? 2 things. How do you expand on planning as this becomes, as you pointed out, more widely known and more people start showing up? So if you can answer that question, and then I got something else I want to answer.
I think there are 2 answers. I think the county's learned about, I think there was a betting pool among the staff as to whether anybody would be interested to show up tonight or whether it would be overflow crowd. So we never know. I'm pleased, by the way, this is a good turnout. My family can't believe people actually show up to listen to me talk about this. I wouldn't go listen to you, Dad. So the public meetings can be like this. Staff is going to have to figure out whether we need a bigger venue, whether we need a bigger room to accommodate more people. They'll either be this, we explain and then we try to field questions, or they'll be an open house type format where you mentioned some of the residential things. People are only concerned about things we're doing about residential, where we have different topic areas, and this is whether it's the stability and integrity of residential neighborhoods and what we are proposing that would be of interest to people in that, the investment community, the mixed use community, the home occupations could be. So topical open houses is open. We sometimes use clickers and have people opine, you know, anonymously. We say, look, we went left, and here's the reason why we went left. But you could go right, and you could go middle. Here are the arguments in favor of a different path. Which one do you vote for? We could use clickers to do that. So all 3 of those are there. You have a follow-up question, but the bottom line is when we say public meetings, we mean face-to-face interaction.
Okay, I understand the meaning of public meetings.
Okay.
What I'm asking is, are they all going to be in this building?
No, I don't.
Are you available to go to civic associations or something like that also? Do you plan on having it around different places in the county?
Here's what usually happens, and we haven't. I can't answer until I talk to my folks. When we're here, we'll be here probably. I think I counted 6 to 8 times during this process. We're not here all the time. We fly in from Denver and North Carolina.
When you say here, in this area.
In this area.
Not this room.
No. When we're in Fairfax County to work on this project. We are at your disposal. We work with staff to try to figure out who do we need to talk to, who needs extra attention, or we've heard a lot of business community. How do we get more citizens? How do we get more of them? I understand, but it's in my interest to not be criticized for getting this wrong at the end. So we do try to balance as we go along. I think the county's interest is in having it in different places, and I'll tell you what happens at the end. What usually happens is we can't be here for all the meetings people want us to be here for. So we come out with a draft. After it's been out a month, we explain the rationale behind it. The footnotes tell us we do this. We make a PowerPoint. Sometimes we make a video, and we make that available to people. And then what usually happens is that county staff uses those materials to go out and do the individual meetings upon request and whatever people want to do it. It's the same presentation that everybody got. It's just a logistical thing. We are willing, but we are not able. We're not here all the time. But if you, whether you think, you know, he made a presentation, I was dubious, but it seemed like a good reason, we should have the county come out and talk about it more, or he gave a reason and it sounded terrible to me, let's have the county come out and defend it. Yeah. But it can't be us all the time. So. But the intention is not to have it be here all the time, the intention is to have it move around. So.
All right, so if I understand what you're trying to do, if I can give an example. You said that you've more than once referred to after you get done with your project that staff will review it. Okay. I also heard you say that you're going to make it in simple language and you're going to try and reduce conflicts. Right. All right. So what I find when I'm dealing with the county and land use issues is, like you said, in one part it says something and another part says something else. Right. The county will call an outlot and they'll give that outlot for a reason for this issue, right. But they then use the outlot to eliminate setbacks on a major road or something like that. And the staff doesn't know the difference. Okay. So if that's what you're shooting for, I'm all for it. I think that would help staff and the citizens take care of that. Is that what you're saying you're going to do?
I think, yes, the answer is yes. I would say it that way and another way. Right now, because of the age and the structure and just the content of your code, staff has to make a lot of interpretations. They have to interpolate between it's not quite this and it's not quite that. Same thing. Are the setbacks measured based on an outlot? What happened when this property got taken by the state for a highway? There are all kinds of things that they have to call. When you're interpreting the code over and over again, I got to tell you, even the best intentioned staff is going to get different answers to the same questions in different circumstances. So our goal is to reduce the number of times you have to interpret it, come up with consistent rules about that. We asked them at our first meeting, can you provide us a list of all your interpretations? And they just looked at the ceiling and said, oh my God, where do we start? You know? So that tells us there are a lot of them that have been made, but we are going to try to see what interpretations they've made and try to put them in so that, guys, most people want predictability. They don't want it called, decided differently in a different context unless there's a real reason for that. So yes, trying to figure out what the gaps are, trying to fill those gaps in a reasonable way, and then explain why that we think is the right thing to do, so that it can be done consistently the next time is part of what we're doing. Do you ever look at priorities? So like outlot, or setbacks overlay outlots or something like that? That's usually you have to come up with a set of rules that do that. That's exactly right. You had your hand up and then we'll come up front. Yes?
Thank you. If you have a suggestion, it's about groups that might be interested and valuable to provide feedback. I'm thinking of the multicultural community, our diverse chambers of commerce. The county has some small business commission and a multicultural advisory council. How would we make those suggestions or see if they've already perhaps been consulted?
I would just get on the website and file a comment that you'd like to see the following groups consulted, and that'll go in along with substantive comments like I hate mixed use or whatever else. But the point is they field them all. They all go to Connie. Connie is fielding them and sending them on to us. Those about meeting groups, if they ask Clarion, our answer is always, if they ask, talk to them, include them. They don't have to consult us on that. They have to talk about, have they done it before? Have they already done it? Do they have the staff to do it? Can they do it this month, next month? But those kind of comments will be handled internally by staff, and they're planned. They understand, like us. What you don't want is to have people at the end say they weren't consulted when they asked for it. So those, they try to do them. So, yeah. I saw another hand. Yes, was it you?
From Clarion's experience, do you follow up or do you keep track after you leave a job? The reason I'm asking this is we are literally limp with, it seems like it's like Trump's government. You wake up in the morning and read the papers to see what zoning amendments are coming forward each day. Mm-hmm. And I'm exaggerating, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. We're limp from trying to keep track of zoning amendments that may or may not affect our communities. And when you go through this amazing, fabulous ordering and restructuring and making sane language so that mere mortals can understand, do you find that then the speed or the velocity at which these new zoning amendments keep popping out?
Yes, we find it goes down. Because, well, you try to, the structure, what we try to create is you try to create a robust structure. And when you try to name every use, you will fail. When you try to have a separate amendment on every little thing that comes up, you will fail. The structure of it has to be more robust and be something that, in fact, you've used use categories or you've used rules of administration that require you not to have to amend it so far. Now, I will say this, and once again, I have not talked to my client about this, but many folks are concerned about that. When they get to the end, they say, so how do we prevent that? How do we prevent the kind of barnacles being added every month or things that we'll later regret because they sound great, but one thing is, with a more robust structure, you're much more likely when you draft an amendment, somebody calls up and says, I want the following addressed, and staff looks at it, they'll say, actually, here's where we would put that in the code. It's much easier to find, and you know what? We've got something that is almost what that is. We don't need a new amendment. We need to change something over here because we actually have addressed that for uses like this. This one's different. We got to amend it, but we don't have to create a new chapter. We don't have to have a new freestanding ordinance. We run an amendment. But the real answer is more and more communities are trying to come up with a 1 year or a 2 year update cycle on their development codes and being more disciplined about it. Once again, Fairfax County, not Denver, but when Denver redid its code and adopted it in 2010, and I didn't write it, but my competitors who did write it gave them the same advice I would, which is it drives citizens crazy to have to watch all the time to see what's happening. Adopt a schedule in which every so often, usually people say, oh, we'll do it every 6 months. Well, no, you won't, because you got other things to do. Every year or 2 years. Denver said a year, and it's turned into kind of a 2 year cycle, but they're trying to be disciplined, where they say, we collect these things, and we bring them forward on a schedule so that every so often, people know that they have to read these, but it gives staff and the citizens the chance to see how this proposed change affects that proposed change, and you can look at them. Citizens usually like it a lot. Occasionally, the business community doesn't like it because they like to make it, what do I need to do to get my project adopted? If you've gotten a good development code structure, you should have less of that happening, less rifle shot amendments. But it also, and again, I haven't talked to my client about this. This may not be something they want to do, but it creates a culture in which we amend the code in a thoughtful process in which it is not simply a matter of who walks in the door and asks for attention on a given day. That it is citizens and business communities need to weigh in on this. It is easier on them when we come up with a predictable schedule for doing this, and we take forward a lot of them. Some of them get taken out because there's no agreement on them, but you do it in a way that engages people so that you don't have kind of always have to watch what's going on with them.
And to your point there,
yeah.
I so appreciate your comment about citizens and business community.
Right.
Citizens are trying to work with the business community, and we go to meetings and people and the staff, and they don't work up. They do not wake up in the morning and think of how can we screw citizens.
Yeah, right.
They're working as hard as they can. They have the best system.
Right.
But citizens aren't appointed to boards, as other people say, or task force or whatever. And we get short shrift. And then when we ask for more engagement, we're given titular meetings, but the decisions never change. They were what they were going to be when they started. So it's this fake meeting that we have engagement, but we're really not paid attention to, that is just maddening. To the point where we're pretty upset.
I can tell, and I can also tell that we have a little bit of an uphill to climb here in terms of the credibility of the process and engagement. But all I can say is we will do our best. We're very well aware of what has created anxiety and anger in the past, and so we got to move forward and do the best we can.
Trying to make it better.
Did I see I don't think so. So, sir, go ahead. We'll say this.
I'm not sure if this is Leslie Johnson over here or not.
Yes, it is.
If it's not.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. That's why. So what I was going to say is, in the past, it seemed to me we had a plan amendment cycle, and I don't remember the details, but let's say it was for.
We have a work program, a year work program.
So can you just summarize for the audience so that we know, which areas of the county are you working on in 2018? Which are the priority areas and which are not? Just so that we see how this process might relate.
Well, we have a work program, a zoning ordinance amendment work program that we adopt, that the board adopts every year. And we're still working off the 2017 one. And that work program that was adopted by the board in July of this past year has, and we did a little bit differently. We have kind of two categories. We have zMOD, and under the zMOD, which would include this update to the uses and the structure, but we also targeted several amendments that we wanted to take through under that structure. The minor mods was the first. Restaurants was just adopted, where we, tried to make it easier, changed the names, took away some of the use limitations, and then we're working on signs. From a content neutral standpoint. That's ongoing now, and we've had some meetings. We're going to the development process committee probably in March to talk about signage again. We also have on that list, and I don't know whether, where we are, whether we're going to start it now or a little bit later, but we do want to look at the planned development housing districts, and because some of them, we're not seeing the larger development anymore in these PDH. We're seeing smaller infill, and issues have changed, and we want to take another look at how we do that. We have another list, and I have another set of staff that are working on other amendments. Some of those amendments include the short-term rental, things that come out of the General Assembly, the continuing care, telecommunications. We have agriculture we still want to tackle, urban agriculture, different forms, which kind of dovetails into, office repurposing. People are now, using vertical gardening, where you can take an office building and put lights in it and grow crops, if you will, different types. So, and that gets into the artisan manufacturing. So some of this kind of will find its way through. So we're still working on those amendments also. And the PRC district, we understand
it would
that.
help if you publicize, and maybe you have.
But I think that's a good idea. On the zMOD website, we could kind of show those lists of things the county's working on.
We have a link on the website.
The only other one I'm concerned about is the parking ratio changes. Is that?
Not now.
I've seen something. I don't know what I saw.
Well, there is there is a planning commission hearing tonight on changes to Article 11, which is our parking. It's not changing the requirements, it's changing the process by which we can approve parking reductions. And so that's being tackled. That's been on the list for a while. But we're not, there are some, as Don alluded to, there are some substantive amendments. Parking's one of them, that once we get through with the structure and the formatting and the uses, there will be some of these bigger amendments that we need to tackle, and we may be able to use Don's group to help us tackle that. But parking is one of those that we know it's got to be fixed, but that's a year-long process.
These issues are vetted through the board's development process committee. And those committees are committees of the full board, all members of the board. Development process committee is chaired by Supervisor Kathy Smith, and all of those meetings are televised on Channel 16 live. They're also live streamed on the county's website. They're open to the public. Anyone who would like to attend, and it's in room 11, just right down the hall.
Chairman, I wondered why we weren't over there tonight, so that what was done here could go out to the county as a whole. It may be that future meetings could be over there as it goes out to the county.
And generally, that room is reserved for board committee rooms and board meetings.
Just a thought.
But this is being captured, and it will be available for.
As long as it's ready for prime time.
Right.
Okay.
But I would say, Rob and Tony, I think that's a great idea, and we will look at putting up a calendar that will make it easier of zoning amendment events by month or week, or probably not by week, but a calendar of zoning ordinance amendments to be more transparent and make it easier for you to follow both the zMOD and the other amendments that are going on.
And you can email us, and you can call us, 324-703-324-1314, and we have staff that will be available.
White flag. The truth is, and Chairman Bolden knows this, I go to maybe 5 meetings a week.
Yes, yes, you do.
I'm maxed out dealing with WMATA and I-66 tolls and rest and stuff, and it's hard to
It's
keep
very hard.
focused.
There's a lot of things going on right now. And, you know, the bad news is it's hard for you to track it all. The good news is they're trying to solve a lot of things. They're trying to move them forward on a lot of things. Let me do the one thing. I saw this woman's hand up at the back. You had your hand up for a while. Did you? I think you. Oh, you're just waving at somebody. Okay. We are scheduled to be in this room till 9. We're happy to stay. I'm happy to stay and answer questions. I don't want to cut it off. On the other hand, if that's what people want to talk about tonight and you want to go back to your families, then that's also okay. I kind of feel like some of the energy is soaking out of the room. The fact that we've been able to keep you interested in zoning for an hour and 45 minutes is a good sign. So I think unless somebody wants to do it, I'll say we're done, but we'll stay here to answer some questions if you'd like to individually. So please stay engaged. This is a good faith effort to try to remain transparent and engaged in this. I do believe it will be successful, particularly if you tell your friends to show up and be engaged.